I was the only one who noticed when the valedictorian started systematically destroying every student with a learning disability at our elite academy. Then, she made a mistake. She bragged about getting my friend expelled by planting a plagiarized essay on her computer. I was 14 when I got kicked out of my local high school, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that's when I got a full scholarship to Wexford Academy for gifted students. You see, up until that point, everyone thought I was stupid. Teachers would literally move me to the back of the class so they wouldn't have to deal with me. So even being surrounded by certified geniuses was better than being treated like I was worthless. I thought I would be the only one who felt different, until 2 months later when I met my saving grace. It came in the form of a girl with worn-out shoes and a voice recorder named Gaia. As soon as she walked into advanced physics, everyone started whispering. I was going to invite her to sit with me when suddenly my lab partner Alex grabbed my shoulder. "Don't. She gets extra time on tests and uses a laptop for notes. My brother said she probably faked a disability to get in here." I wanted to tell Alex that getting accommodations didn't mean cheating, but I also remembered how hard I had to work to prove I belonged here. So instead, I just stayed quiet and tried to tell myself that everyone had to earn their place. But what they did to her over the next few weeks still makes me sick. It started small. Kids would hide her voice recorder so she couldn't record lectures. They would switch her special paper with regular bright white sheets that made her eyes hurt. And instead of getting angry, she did something even worse. She was patient. When she aced the chemistry exam, she offered to tutor the kids who failed. When someone accidentally deleted her notes, she just smiled and said, "Technology could be tricky." I watched her spend 6 hours on assignments that took others too. Not because she was slow, but because she had to work differently. She color-coded everything, used special fonts, and took breaks every 20 minutes. Some kids called it cheating. I called it working smarter. But then came the academic decathlon tryouts. For those who don't know, it's a competition where the school's best students compete against other schools. The winner gets a full ride to any college they want. Gaia signed up immediately. That's when things got ugly. I was studying in the library when I heard shouting from the computer lab. Gaia was standing in front of her screen, which was displaying an essay that wasn't hers. "This is plagiarized," the academic dean announced to everyone watching. Word for word from a published paper. Gaia kept insisting someone must have switched her file. She said she had the original on her laptop with timestamps to prove it. But when she opened her laptop, all her files were gone, wiped clean. "This is what happens when we lower our standards," the dean said, not even trying to whisper. "Some people just aren't meant for elite education." Gaia's hands were shaking as she tried to explain, but nobody listened. The next morning, she was called before the honor board. I sat outside the room, planning to testify that Gaia would never cheat, but they never called me in. After an hour, Gaia walked out with tears streaming down her face. "Expelled," she whispered when she saw me. "They think I've been cheating all along." I tried to visit her dorm, but security was already there, watching her pack. The rumor mill was in full swing. Kids who had never talked to Gaia suddenly had stories about her suspicious study habits, how she always needed special conditions, how it wasn't fair that she got advantages they didn't. I found Gaia that night in the parking lot, loading boxes into an old car. She wasn't crying anymore, just staring at nothing with hollow eyes. This girl who stayed kind through everything they did to her was finally broken. I didn't know what to say, so I just helped her load boxes. After a few minutes, she turned to me. "You're the only one who ever looked at me like I was smart," she said quietly. "You deserve to know why this matters so much." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. A little boy, maybe 8 years old, struggling to read a picture book. "My brother has severe dyslexia just like me. I was supposed to prove that kids like us could make it, that we belonged in places like this." She closed the trunk and leaned against the car. "The worst part? I know exactly who did this. Charlotte from the decathlon team. She needed me gone to secure her spot." Gaia laughed, but it was bitter and sharp. "She told me yesterday, said my special needs were taking opportunities from real students." Rage filled every cell in my body. I spent months wishing someone would stand up to these entitled jerks, but I never knew that someone was going to be me. The next morning, I skipped breakfast and went straight to the computer lab. My hands trembled as I logged into the school's network. Charlotte had made a mistake telling Gaia she was behind it. Now I had a target. I started by checking the academic decathlon roster. Charlotte was listed as an alternate, with Gaia's name crossed out in red. The timestamp showed the change happened yesterday at 3:47 p.m., exactly 20 minutes after Gaia's expulsion hearing ended. Charlotte hadn't even waited for Gaia to leave campus before claiming her spot. My stomach churned as I dug deeper into the system logs. The plagiarized essay that appeared on Gaia's screen had been uploaded from a guest account at 2:15 a.m. 3 nights ago, the same night Charlotte had library duty. I took screenshots of everything, my heart pounding with each click. Someone cleared their throat behind me. I spun around to find Charlotte standing there, her perfectly straightened hair catching the morning light. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. Doing some early morning research, she moved closer, glancing at my screen. I quickly minimized the windows, just checking my grades. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Charlotte perched on the desk next to mine, swinging her legs like we were old friends. Such a shame about Gaia. I tried to warn her that cheating would catch up eventually. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. She didn't cheat. The evidence says otherwise. Charlotte examined her manicured nails. Besides, the school needs students who can compete without special accommodations. Real talent doesn't need extra time or special paper. I wanted to throw my laptop at her smug face. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. Getting emotional would only make me look unstable, and I needed credibility if I was going to expose her. "Funny how you got her spot so quickly," I said, watching her reaction. Charlotte's smile widened. "Lucky timing. I've been preparing for months, just waiting for an opening." She hopped off the desk and leaned close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. "A word of advice? Don't dig into things that don't concern you. Wexford rewards students who mind their own business." After she left, I sat there shaking. Charlotte wasn't just confident, she was bragging. She wanted me to know she'd destroyed Gaia and gotten away with it. I spent the rest of the day gathering evidence. During lunch, I found Marcus from IT Club and asked about recovering deleted files. He explained that when Charlotte wiped Gaia's laptop, she'd used a basic deletion program that left data fragments behind. For $50, he'd try to recover what he could. That afternoon, I tracked down 3 students who who'd been in the computer lab when Gaia's essay appeared. 2 claimed they hadn't seen anything, their eyes darting away when I mentioned Charlotte. The third, a freshman named David, pulled me aside after class. "I saw Charlotte near Gaia's computer that night," he whispered, "but I can't say anything official. My scholarship depends on staying out of trouble." I understood his fear. We were all here on someone else's dime, one mistake away from losing everything. But Gaia had already lost everything, and someone needed to care about that. That evening, I sat in my dorm room organizing what I'd found. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Charlotte had motive, opportunity, and had practically confessed. But I needed something concrete, something the administration couldn't ignore. My roommate walked in and saw my notes spread across the bed. "What's all this?" I explained about Gaia and Charlotte, showing him the timestamps and system logs. He listened quietly, then shook his head. "You need to be careful. Charlotte's mom is on the board of trustees. Even if you're right, going after her could backfire. So we just let her get away with it?" He shrugged. "That's how places like this work. The connected kids always win." But I couldn't accept that. I thought about Gaia loading boxes into her car, about her little brother who needed to believe that kids like them could succeed. Someone had to fight for them. The next morning, Marcus texted me. He'd recovered some of Gaia's files, including her original essay with timestamps proving she'd written it weeks before the plagiarized version appeared. I met him behind the science building to collect a USB drive. "This is good," he said, handing it over. "But Charlotte's smart. She'll have covered her tracks." I was heading back to my dorm when I noticed Charlotte talking to the academic dean outside the administration building. They were laughing about something, and the dean patted Charlotte's shoulder like a proud parent. My stomach sank. How could I fight someone with those connections? That afternoon, I made copies of all my evidence and hid them in different places. If Charlotte realized I was investigating her, I didn't want her destroying everything like she'd done to Gaia. During dinner, I overheard 2 girls from the decathlon team discussing practice schedules. Charlotte had already taken over as team captain, implementing new study sessions and strategy meetings. She was erasing Gaia from the team's memory, replacing her completely. I couldn't eat. Well, nothing says, "Welcome to gifted school," quite like discovering the gift some students have is destroying others' dreams with the efficiency of a corporate villain. Every bite tasted like guilt for not speaking up during Gaia's hearing. I'd been a coward then, but I wouldn't be one now. That night, I created a detailed timeline of events, cross-referencing the system logs with witness statements and the recovered files. The picture was clear. Charlotte had planned this carefully, exploiting Gaia's need for accommodations to make her look like a cheater. I stared at the timeline until my eyes burned, knowing I had enough to raise questions, but not enough to guarantee Charlotte would face consequences. The next step required something more direct. The following morning, I arrived at the computer lab before dawn. The building was empty except for the night janitor finishing his rounds. I needed to access Charlotte's activity logs from her personal account, something that would show her digital fingerprints all over Gaia's expulsion. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I navigated through the school's network architecture. Marcus had taught me a few tricks about finding cached data, and I discovered Charlotte had been sloppy. She'd cleared her main browser history, but forgot about the backup log stored on the shared drive. There it was. Charlotte had accessed multiple academic databases the night before Gaia's essay appeared, including the exact journal where the plagiarized paper originated. She'd downloaded 17 different articles, clearly searching for something that matched Gaia's writing style. I took screenshots of everything, my pulse racing. This was the smoking gun I needed. Combined with the recovered files and timestamps, it painted a clear picture of premeditated sabotage. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. I quickly logged out and pretended to work on homework as another early rising student entered. My hands shook as I packed up my laptop, the evidence burning like fire on my hard drive. During breakfast, I noticed Charlotte holding court at her usual table, surrounded by decathlon teammates. She was distributing study schedules, her voice carrying across the cafeteria as she outlined their new training regimen. Where Gaia had encouraged collaboration, Charlotte demanded competition. Team members who didn't meet her performance standards would be cut. I watched her work, marveling at how quickly she'd transformed from alternate to dictator. This wasn't just about taking Gaia's spot anymore. Charlotte was reshaping the entire team in her image. After my morning classes, I found David again. He looked nervous when I approached, glancing around to make sure we were alone. I showed him the evidence I'd gathered, explaining how Charlotte had methodically planned Gaia's downfall. His eyes widened as he absorbed the timeline, the screenshots, the recovered files. David pulled out his phone and showed me something that made my heart skip. He'd taken a photo that night in the computer lab, originally just capturing his friends in the background. But there, barely visible in the corner, was Charlotte at Gaia's workstation, her hand on the mouse. The timestamp matched perfectly with when the plagiarized essay was uploaded. David had been sitting on photographic evidence this entire time. He agreed to let me copy the photo, but refused to come forward publicly. His scholarship was his family's only hope for breaking out of poverty. I understood his position, even as frustration gnawed at me. How many others had evidence they were too scared to share? That afternoon brought an unexpected development. I was organizing my evidence when my roommate burst in, face flushed with excitement. The academic dean had announced a surprise inspection of all decathlon team members' academic records. Apparently, there were concerns about maintaining the team's integrity after recent events. My blood ran cold. This had Charlotte written all over it. She was consolidating power, using Gaia's expulsion as an excuse to purge anyone she saw as competition. I spent the evening backing up all my evidence to multiple cloud services and USB drives. If Charlotte was willing to destroy Gaia to get on the team, what would she do to stay there? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that Charlotte somehow knew about my investigation. My paranoia proved justified the next morning. I opened my laptop to find my desktop wallpaper changed to a photo of Charlotte at a decathlon competition, trophy in hand. She'd hacked into my computer overnight, leaving her calling card. Panic surged through me as I checked my files. Everything appeared intact, but the message was clear. Charlotte knew what I was doing and wanted me to know she could reach me anytime. I skipped breakfast and went straight to Marcus. He ran diagnostics on my laptop, finding sophisticated spyware installed deep in the system. Charlotte had been monitoring my keystrokes, watching me build my case against against her. Marcus managed to remove the spyware, but the damage was done. Charlotte knew everything I'd discovered. She'd probably already started covering her tracks, destroying any evidence I hadn't yet found. That afternoon, I received an email from the academic dean's office. I was being called in for a meeting the next morning regarding concerns about my recent activities. My stomach dropped. Charlotte had made her move. I spent the rest of the day in the library, pretending to study while actually preparing my defense. If Charlotte wanted to paint me as the villain, I needed to be ready with facts. I organized my evidence into a clear presentation, focusing on the irrefutable timestamps and David's photo. During dinner, I noticed students whispering and glancing my way. The rumor mill was already spinning. By the time I returned to my dorm, my roommate informed me that word had spread about my obsession with Charlotte and my harassment of decathlon team members. Charlotte had flipped the script. Instead of defending against accusations, she'd gone on the offensive, painting me as a jealous student trying to sabotage her success. I barely slept that night, running through possible scenarios for the morning meeting. Would they even look at my evidence, or had Charlotte's connections already poisoned the well? The next morning arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. The walk to the administration building felt like a march to execution. The dean's office was intimidatingly formal, all dark wood and leather. The dean sat behind his massive desk, Charlotte beside him in a chair, looking perfectly composed. Her mother sat in the corner, power radiating from her tailored suit. The dean's opening words confirmed my worst fears. I was being accused of cyberstalking, harassment, and attempting to frame an exemplary student. Charlotte had filed a formal complaint, complete with screenshots of my suspicious computer activity. I tried to present my evidence, but the dean barely glanced at it. Charlotte's mother interrupted repeatedly, questioning my motivations and mental state. They'd already decided I was guilty. This meeting was just a formality. Charlotte sat silent throughout, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The performance was flawless. She'd transformed from predator to victim, and everyone bought it. The meeting ended with a warning: cease all contact with Charlotte and her teammates, or face immediate expulsion. My evidence was confiscated pending investigation, though I knew it would disappear just like Gaia's files. I left the office in a daze. Charlotte had outmaneuvered me completely. Not only had she destroyed Gaia, but she'd also neutralized the only person trying to expose her. The next few days were a nightmare. Students avoided me in hallways. Teachers watched me with suspicion. My reputation, carefully built over months of hard work, crumbled overnight. Charlotte, meanwhile, thrived. She led the decathlon team to victory in their first competition, earning praise from administrators and students alike. The local newspaper ran a feature on her leadership skills and academic excellence. I wanted to give up. Charlotte had won, and fighting her had only made things worse. But then I received an unexpected message. It was from a student I'd never met, a senior named Victoria who'd graduated the previous year. She'd heard about my situation through the alumni network and wanted to talk. We met at a coffee shop off campus. Victoria listened to my story without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she pulled out her own laptop. Victoria showed me files from 2 years ago when she'd been on the decathlon team. A promising sophomore named Sebastian had been expelled for cheating just weeks before a major competition. The circumstances were eerily similar. Plagiarized work appearing mysteriously, deleted files, Charlotte emerging as his replacement. My hands trembled as I reviewed the evidence. Charlotte had done this before. Victoria had suspected foul play but hadn't pursued it, afraid of rocking the boat so close to graduation. Together, we began piecing together Charlotte's pattern. She identified talented students who might threaten her position, then systematically destroyed them, using their own strengths against them. Gaia's accommodations made her an easy target, just as Sebastian's tendency to work late in the computer lab had made him vulnerable. Victoria introduced me to other alumni who'd witnessed suspicious incidents involving Charlotte. Slowly, a network formed of people who'd been too scared to speak up individually, but found strength in numbers. We worked in secret, using encrypted messaging apps and meeting off campus. Each person contributed pieces of the puzzle, screenshots, overheard conversations, witnessed incidents that seemed minor alone, but formed a damning pattern together. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The janitor who cleaned the computer lab reached out through Victoria. The janitor reaching out through Victoria makes perfect sense when you think about it. They probably see everything happening in that computer lab at odd hours. How long has the janitor been watching Charlotte's pattern unfold? He'd been troubled by what happened to Gaia and had something to share. Security footage from the lab was supposedly deleted after 30 days, but the janitor had noticed Charlotte asking about camera blind spots weeks before Gaia's expulsion. She'd been planning this carefully, but her reconnaissance had caught the janitor's attention. He'd made copies of certain footage on his personal device, concerned about student safety. The videos showed Charlotte entering the lab multiple times during off hours, always when she wasn't scheduled to be there. We couldn't see what she did at the computers, but the timestamps aligned perfectly with suspicious activity in the system logs. Combined with everything else, it was enough to establish a clear pattern of behavior. The challenge now was presenting this evidence in a way that couldn't be dismissed or buried. Charlotte's family connections made a direct approach impossible. We needed a strategy that bypassed the administration entirely. Victoria suggested focusing on the upcoming regional decathlon championship. College recruiters would attend, along with reporters and education officials. If we could expose Charlotte's pattern publicly, the school would be forced to act. We spent weeks preparing, gathering more evidence and testimonies. Former teammates revealed how Charlotte had manipulated team dynamics, pitting members against each other and creating an atmosphere of fear. One girl, Tori, shared how Charlotte had offered to help with her scholarship application, then submitted a weaker version behind her back. Another described finding his study materials destroyed before a crucial practice, with Charlotte conveniently prepared to take his place. The pattern was consistent: identify threats, create crises, emerge as the solution. Charlotte had turned academic competition into psychological warfare. As the championship approached, our coalition grew. Parents of affected students joined our cause, furious that their children had been sabotaged. A few teachers, bound by confidentiality but troubled by what they'd observed, provided careful guidance. Charlotte, unaware of our organizing, continued her reign. She pushed the team relentlessly, cutting anyone who showed weakness. The collaborative spirit Gaia had fostered was completely gone, replaced by a culture of paranoia and competition. I watched from afar, banned from interacting with the team, but documenting everything. Charlotte's behavior grew more erratic as pressure mounted. She accused teammates of plotting against her, installed tracking software on shared computers, and demanded absolute loyalty. 3 days before the championship, disaster struck our plans. Someone had leaked our intentions to Charlotte. She went into damage control mode, filing preemptive complaints about harassment and conspiracy against her. The school administration, already inclined to protect their star student, issued warnings to several coalition members. Victoria received a letter threatening legal action if she continued spreading defamatory information about a current student. It seemed like Charlotte would win again. She'd turned our own strategy against us, painting our pursuit of justice as a coordinated attack on an innocent student. But Charlotte had made a crucial mistake. In her paranoia, she'd alienated her own teammates. The pressure, the surveillance, the constant accusations had pushed them to a breaking point. The night before the championship, 3 team members approached me secretly. They were terrified of Charlotte, but more terrified of competing under her leadership. They'd witnessed her tampering with teammates' materials and had recordings of her threatening to destroy anyone who challenged her authority. These weren't outsiders or alumni. These were current team members with everything to lose. Their testimony would be impossible to dismiss. We worked through the night, organizing their evidence and preparing a presentation. The plan was risky. Expose Charlotte during the championship opening ceremony, when administrators couldn't sweep it under the rug. The morning of the championship dawned gray and cold. I arrived early, my evidence copied onto multiple USB drives and uploaded to secure servers. Victoria and other coalition members positioned themselves strategically throughout the venue. Charlotte arrived with the team, projecting confidence despite the tension visible in her teammates' faces. She'd dressed for victory, unaware that her carefully constructed empire was about to crumble. The opening ceremony began with typical fanfare. School officials gave speeches about academic excellence and integrity. The irony wasn't lost on our coalition. Then came the moment we'd planned for. During a pause between speakers, one of Charlotte's teammates stepped forward. With trembling hands, she connected her laptop to the projection system. The evidence appeared on screen for hundreds to see. Timestamps, recordings, testimonies from multiple victims spanning years. Charlotte's pattern of destruction laid bare in undeniable detail. The room erupted in chaos. Charlotte tried to flee but found exits blocked by coalition members. School officials scrambled to cut the projection, but we'd prepared for that, with backup presenters ready at multiple locations. As the truth poured out, something beautiful happened. More victims found their voices. Students who'd suffered in silence stood up, sharing their stories. The scope of Charlotte's manipulation became clear, and no amount of family connections could hide it. The championship was postponed as officials launched an immediate investigation. Charlotte's mother threatened lawsuits, but the evidence was overwhelming and publicly exposed. Reporters who'd come to cover an academic competition found themselves documenting a scandal. Within hours, Charlotte was suspended pending full investigation. The decathlon team, freed from her tyranny, asked for Gaia to be reinstated. Parents demanded accountability from administrators who'd enabled Charlotte's behavior for years. I thought about calling Gaia immediately, but Victoria suggested waiting until we had concrete results. False hope would be cruel after everything she'd endured. The investigation moved quickly under public scrutiny. More evidence emerged, including communications showing Charlotte's mother had pressured administrators to ignore complaints about her daughter. The corruption ran deep, but sunlight proved an effective disinfectant. A week later, the official verdict came down. Charlotte was expelled for academic misconduct and fraud. Several administrators faced disciplinary action for their complicity. Most importantly, Gaia's expulsion was overturned, her record cleared of all charges. I finally made that call to Gaia. Her voice broke when she heard the news. She'd been working at a grocery store, trying to save money for community college while tutoring her brother. The scholarship she'd lost meant everything to her family. The school, desperate to contain the scandal, offered Gaia full reinstatement with additional support. They couldn't undo the trauma, but they could try to make amends. Gaia returned to campus on a Thursday morning. I waited by the entrance, watching her walk through those gates she'd thought were closed forever. She moved differently now, warier, but also stronger. The girl who'd been endlessly patient with her tormentors had learned that kindness without boundaries invited exploitation. But she hadn't let Charlotte's cruelty poison her core values. She still believed in helping others. She just knew now to protect herself too. We rebuilt slowly. Trust, once shattered, required careful reconstruction. The decathlon team welcomed Gaia back, but she declined the captain position, preferring to focus on her studies and helping other students with learning differences. Charlotte's legacy of fear gradually faded. Students who'd been too scared to seek accommodations came forward. The culture of competition at any cost gave way to collaborative learning. I learned my own lessons through this ordeal. Standing up to power required more than righteous anger. It demanded strategy, allies, and patience. Charlotte had almost destroyed me for trying to help Gaia, but that attempt had ultimately led to her downfall. The championship was eventually held, with Wexford fielding a team built on mutual support rather than cutthroat competition. They didn't win first place, but they competed with integrity, which mattered more than any trophy. Months later, I received a message from Sebastian, the student Charlotte had targeted years before. He'd followed the news and wanted to thank our coalition for achieving what he'd thought impossible: justice. His message reminded me that Charlotte's victims extended far beyond those we'd identified. How many dreams had she crushed? How many brilliant minds had she driven away from academic pursuits? We couldn't undo all that damage, but we'd prevented future harm. Charlotte's pattern was broken, her methods exposed. She transferred to a private school across the country, her reputation preceding her wherever she went. The system that had enabled her faced scrutiny too. Board positions were restructured, policies revised, accountability measures implemented. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Gaia graduated with honors, earning admission admission to her dream university with a full scholarship. She spoke at the ceremony about resilience, about systems that failed students who learned differently, about the importance of allies who refused to stay silent. I sat in the audience, remembering that night in the parking lot when she'd loaded boxes with hollow eyes. The transformation was remarkable, but I knew the scars remained. Some wounds never fully heal. We just learned to build strength around them. Our coalition didn't disband after Charlotte's expulsion. We discovered the power of collective action, the importance of documenting patterns, the necessity of protecting vulnerable students from those who would exploit systemic weaknesses. Charlotte's downfall reads like a master class in how to dig your own grave with a gold-plated shovel. She went from chess player to checkers champion the moment she started threatening lawyers instead of covering her tracks. Victoria established a mentorship program, connecting current students with alumni who'd faced similar challenges. The janitor who'd saved crucial footage was recognized for his integrity. David, who'd been too scared to speak initially, found courage in our success and became an advocate for scholarship students. The ripple effects continued long after the headlines faded. Other schools investigated their own competitive programs, finding similar patterns of abuse. Charlotte wasn't unique. She was just the one who got caught. As I prepared for my own graduation, I reflected on how that moment of rage in the parking lot had changed everything. I'd wanted to fight for Gaia, but the battle had become bigger than either of us. We'd exposed not just one manipulative student, but an entire culture that prioritized achievement over ethics, that allowed the connected to prey on the vulnerable, that dismissed accommodation needs as weakness. The morning I skipped breakfast to investigate Charlotte seemed like a lifetime ago. That frightened, angry kid had evolved into someone who understood that real change required more than good intentions. It demanded persistence, strategy, and the courage to keep fighting when power tried to silence you. Gaia and I stayed in touch through college and beyond. She became a special education advocate, using her experience to help other students navigate systems designed without them in mind. Her brother thrived with her support, proving that kids like them absolutely belonged in places like Wexford. Charlotte's name became a cautionary tale in academic circles, a reminder that brilliance without integrity was just sophisticated cruelty. Her victims found healing in various ways, some through activism, others through quiet recovery. The evidence we'd gathered lived on in policy documents and training materials, helping institutions recognize and prevent similar patterns. Our coalition's work became a case study in grassroots organizing and the importance of bystander intervention. Years later, when I faced my own ethical challenges in the workplace, I remembered Charlotte's victims finding their voices in that championship hall. I remembered that silence in the face of injustice was complicity, that systems protected those who worked them unless challenged by collective action. The story that began with one girl's expulsion had become something larger, a testament to the power of documentation, alliance building, and refusing to accept that's how things work as an answer. Charlotte had thought herself untouchable, protected by connections, and willing to destroy anyone who threatened her ambitions. But she'd underestimated the power of truth when enough people decided to speak it together. In the end, justice came not from any single hero, but from a coalition of the wounded who refused to let their pain be meaningless. We'd turned our individual vulnerabilities into collective strength, proving that even the most entrenched corruption could fall when exposed to sustained pressure and sunlight. The girl with worn-out shoes and a voice recorder had lost everything because she dared to excel while needing accommodations. But in losing, she'd ultimately won something greater, a community that recognized injustice and chose to fight it, no matter the cost. That's the real lesson from those dark days at Wexford. Not that good always triumphs, or that justice is guaranteed, but that when enough people decide something is wrong, they can create change that seemed impossible. Charlotte's legacy wasn't the fear she'd instilled or the careers she'd destroyed. It was the movement she'd inadvertently sparked, the voices she'd accidentally unified, the system reforms her cruelty had necessitated. And somewhere in a university library, a girl with special paper and carefully color-coded notes was proving that different didn't mean less than, that accommodation wasn't cheating, that brilliance came in forms that standardized systems often failed to recognize. That was Gaia's true victory, and by extension, ours. Not just that Charlotte faced consequences, but that the culture she'd exploited had finally begun to change. One student, one voice, one act of courage at a time. The rage I'd felt in that parking lot had transformed into something more sustainable, a commitment to noticing, documenting, and challenging systems that allowed predators like Charlotte to thrive. It wasn't always dramatic or headline-worthy, but it mattered, because somewhere, another kid with worn-out shoes was walking into an elite institution, facing whispers and skepticism, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find a system slightly less hostile, allies slightly more willing to speak up, and a path slightly less treacherous than the one Gaia had walked. That possibility made everything we'd endured worthwhile. Charlotte had wanted to destroy one girl's dreams. Instead, she'd created an army of dreamers who understood that protecting each other's aspirations was the only way to ensure everyone had a chance to soar. The morning I'd decided to skip breakfast and investigate had led to this, a network of protectors, a reformed system, and proof that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Charlotte was gone, but her victims remained, transformed from casualties into catalysts. We'd learned that brilliance meant nothing without compassion, that achievement built on others' destruction was hollow victory, that true excellence lifted others rather than crushing them. And in every classroom where a student with different needs was met with support rather than suspicion, in every competition where collaboration mattered more than domination, in every moment when someone chose to document rather than ignore wrongdoing, our coalition's work lived on. The girl who'd patiently endured mockery, who'd smiled when her notes were deleted, who'd offered to tutor those who'd failed her, had taught us all the most important lesson, that kindness wasn't weakness, but choosing to remain kind while also demanding justice, that was true strength. Charlotte had mistaken Gaia's patience for passivity, her accommodations for vulnerability. She'd failed to recognize that someone who worked 6 hours on 2-hour assignments had more determination than someone who'd destroy others rather than compete fairly. In the end, that determination had won. Not through individual heroics, but through collective action. Not through matching Charlotte's cruelty, but through exposing it. Not through working within corrupt systems, but through forcing them to change. The scholarship that had seemed like charity to a stupid kid had launched not just an education, but a revolution in miniature. One that proved that the kids in the back of the class, the ones with voice recorders and special paper, the ones who worked differently, belonged in places like Wexford just as much as anyone else. Maybe more, because they understood something Charlotte never had. That true achievement meant bringing others up with you. That real intelligence included emotional wisdom. That lasting success required integrity as much as ability. The morning I'd sat in that computer lab, hands trembling as I'd uncovered Charlotte's digital footprints, I'd thought I was just trying to help one friend. I'd had no idea I was joining a movement that would reshape an institution and touch countless lives. But that's how change really happened. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Through individual acts of courage connecting into patterns of resistance. Through quiet refusals to accept that's how things work as the final word. Charlotte had created her own downfall by believing she was untouchable. She'd grown careless in her cruelty, obvious in her patterns, predictable in her methods. But mostly, she'd failed to understand that every person she'd destroyed had people who cared about them. And eventually, those people would find each other. We had, and in finding each other, we'd found our power. The power to document, to organize, to refuse silence, to demand better. Charlotte had thought she was eliminating competition. Instead, she'd created a coalition united by shared purpose and mutual protection. The championship hall remained in chaos for 20 minutes after the revelation. Charlotte stood frozen near the stage, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and calculation as she watched her carefully constructed world collapse. Her teammates backed away from her, some crying, others staring in shock at the evidence still displayed on multiple screens throughout the venue. I watched from my position near the exit as school officials huddled in urgent conference. The dean's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized the scope of what had been exposed. Charlotte's mother pushed through the crowd, her designer heels clicking sharply against the floor as she reached her daughter and began issuing rapid instructions. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced ease, ensuring our coalition members maintained their positions at key exits and projection points. We'd anticipated attempts to shut down the presentation, and our redundancy proved necessary when security tried to disconnect the main system, only to find backup laptops continuing the display from different locations. The evidence continued cycling through the screens, timestamps, recovered files, witness testimonies, security footage. Each new piece painted a clearer picture of Charlotte's systematic destruction of her competitors. Parents in the audience began recognizing patterns, connecting their own children's struggles to Charlotte's machinations. Within an hour, the championship officials made their decision. The competition would be postponed indefinitely while a full investigation commenced. Teams from other schools filed out quietly, their coaches exchanging worried glances about the integrity of previous competitions where Charlotte had participated. Charlotte attempted to leave with her mother, but the dean intercepted them at the door. Charlotte's mother clicking through the chaos in designer heels to rescue her daughter. Is peak, my baby would never energy. Though I bet those security guards trying to unplug laptops while more kept popping up felt like they were playing the world's worst game of whack-a-mole. His conversation with them was brief but intense, Charlotte's mother's voice rising in indignation before the dean's firm response silenced her. They were escorted to a side office, away from the dispersing crowd. I spent the next 3 hours in a conference room with Victoria, the 3 brave teammates who'd come forward, and several other coalition members. School officials took our statements one by one, their questions becoming more detailed as they grasped the full extent of Charlotte's actions. The janitor arrived with his saved footage on multiple USB drives, his quiet dignity commanding respect as he explained why he'd felt compelled to preserve the evidence. By evening, the investigation had expanded beyond the championship venue. Administrators called in IT specialists to examine the school's computer systems, searching for traces of Charlotte's digital manipulations. Marcus volunteered his expertise, walking them through the technical aspects of how Charlotte had accessed and altered files. The next morning brought swift developments. Charlotte's suspension became official, announced through a terse email to the student body. The academic decathlon team received notice that all positions would be re-evaluated based on merit and ethical standards. Most significantly, the email mentioned a comprehensive review of all disciplinary actions taken in the past 3 years. I found myself back in the dean's office, but this time as a witness rather than an accused. The dean's demeanor had changed completely, his earlier arrogance replaced by careful professionalism as he reviewed the evidence I'd originally tried to present. He took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and technical details. Charlotte's mother attempted damage control throughout the week. She appeared on campus daily, meeting with various administrators and board members. Her influence, once seemingly absolute, met resistance as the evidence became undeniable. Board members who'd previously deferred to her began distancing themselves, concerned about their own reputations. The IT investigation revealed the depth of Charlotte's technological manipulations. She'd gained unauthorized access to multiple student accounts, altered submission timestamps, and planted evidence of academic dishonesty. Each discovery led to another, creating a web of deceit that stunned even seasoned administrators. David finally agreed to provide official testimony, his courage bolstered by the support of our coalition. His photo proved crucial in establishing Charlotte's physical presence at Gaia's computer during the critical time frame. Other students began coming forward with their own experiences, no longer afraid of Charlotte's retaliation. A week into the investigation, I received the call I'd been hoping for. The administration had reached their preliminary conclusions. Gaia's expulsion would be reversed immediately, her academic record cleared of all charges. judges. They wanted to contact her personally to discuss reinstatement options. I gave them Gaia's contact information, then spent an anxious hour waiting to hear from her. When she finally called back, her voice shook with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. The school had offered her full reinstatement with additional support, including coverage of expenses incurred during her wrongful expulsion. The following Monday marked a turning point. Charlotte's formal expulsion was announced, along with disciplinary action against 2 administrators who'd failed to properly investigate the original complaints. The academic decathlon team would be restructured under new leadership, with an emphasis on collaborative learning rather than cutthroat competition. Gaia returned to campus on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the championship revelation. I waited by the main entrance, watching as she parked her old car and sat for a moment, gathering courage. When she finally emerged, she moved with deliberate steps, her chin raised despite the tremor in her hands. Students noticed her return immediately. Some who'd participated in her torment looked away shamefully, while others offered tentative smiles of support. The walk to the administration building took longer than necessary, as Gaia paused to acknowledge each gesture, her grace in the face of their previous cruelty more powerful than any accusation. The reinstatement meeting included apologies from several administrators, though Gaia listened with polite skepticism rather than easy forgiveness. She negotiated firmly for the support she needed, guaranteed accommodations, protection from retaliation, and funding for the tutoring program she'd wanted to start for students with learning differences. Over the following weeks, the campus atmosphere shifted noticeably. Students who'd hidden their need for accommodations began requesting them openly. The culture of shame around learning differences, carefully cultivated by people like Charlotte, started to crumble. Teachers received training on inclusive education practices, many admitting they'd never understood how their biases had harmed students. Charlotte's attempts to transfer to other prestigious schools met with failure as word of her expulsion spread through academic networks. Her mother's threats of legal action dissolved when lawyers reviewed the overwhelming evidence. The family eventually relocated out of state, their influence at Wexford permanently broken. The restructured decathlon team invited Gaia to join, but she declined the captain position, choosing instead to serve as an advisor while focusing on her studies. She worked with the new leadership to create an environment where collaboration trumped competition, where different learning styles were seen as strengths rather than weaknesses. Victoria's mentorship program gained official recognition and funding from the school. She connected current students with alumni who'd faced similar challenges, creating a support network that hadn't existed during Charlotte's reign. The program's first event drew over 100 participants, including many who'd suffered in silence for years. Sebastian reached out through Victoria, sharing how our success had inspired him to speak publicly about his experience. He'd started graduate school in education policy, determined to prevent future Charlottes from destroying vulnerable students. His thesis focused on systemic reforms to protect students from academic sabotage. The janitor who'd preserved crucial evidence received recognition at a school assembly. His speech was brief but powerful, emphasizing how every member of the school community had a responsibility to protect students. The standing ovation he received lasted several minutes, many wiping away tears as they applauded. 3 months after Charlotte's expulsion, the regional championship was finally held. Wexford's team, rebuilt on principles of mutual support, competed with integrity, if not perfection. They placed third overall, but their collaborative approach drew praise from judges who noted the positive team dynamics. I continued documenting everything, creating a comprehensive record of how one student's cruelty had been enabled by institutional failures. The documentation became part of the school's training materials, a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing achievement over ethics. Gaia's tutoring program for students with learning differences launched successfully, attracting volunteers from across campus. She trained them in patience and understanding, sharing techniques that had helped her succeed despite her challenges. Her little brother visited during family weekend, his pride in his sister visible to everyone who saw them together. The ripple effects extended beyond Wexford. Other schools in our region began examining their own competitive programs, several finding similar patterns of sabotage and manipulation. Charlotte wasn't unique in her methods, just in being caught and exposed so thoroughly. My relationship with the administration evolved from adversarial to cautiously collaborative. They consulted me on policy changes aimed at preventing future incidents, though I maintained healthy skepticism about their commitment to real change. Trust, once broken, required consistent action to rebuild. The coalition we'd formed didn't dissolve after achieving justice for Gaia. We continued meeting monthly, monitoring the implementation of promised reforms and supporting students who faced discrimination. Our encrypted communication channels became a lifeline for those afraid to speak publicly about their struggles. As the academic year drew to a close, Gaia received notification that her scholarship had been fully reinstated with additional support for graduate school. The financial burden her family had carried during her expulsion would be addressed through a special hardship fund, though no amount could truly compensate for the trauma she'd endured. Charlotte's former teammates slowly healed from their experience under her leadership. Some transferred to other schools, unable to move past the memories. Others found strength in survivor solidarity, bonding over their shared experience and commitment to preventing future abuse. The school newspaper, previously a puff piece publication, developed investigative capabilities after the championship revelation. Student journalists began examining other areas where power imbalances enabled exploitation, their work earning recognition and occasionally discomfort from administrators. My own academic performance improved once I no longer spent energy fighting Charlotte's machinations. The skills I developed during the investigation, research, documentation, strategic planning, served me well in advanced coursework. Several professors noted my growth, unaware of the crucible that had forged it. As graduation approached, I reflected on the journey from that rage-filled night in the parking lot to the systematic dismantling of Charlotte's empire. The path hadn't been straight or easy, marked by setbacks and moments of despair, but persistence, combined with collective action, had achieved what seemed impossible. Gaia graduated with highest honors, her speech at the ceremony focusing on resilience and the power of community support. She thanked those who'd fought for her while acknowledging the ongoing work needed to create truly inclusive educational environments. Her brother sat in the front row, recording everything on the voice recorder she'd given him. The reforms implemented after Charlotte's expulsion became models for other institutions. Policy documents citing the Wexford incident appeared in educational journals, analyzing how competitive pressure could create environments where predatory behavior flourished. Our story became a teaching tool, though sanitized versions often minimized the personal cost to victims. Years later, I would encounter former Wexford students in various fields, many carrying lessons learned during those tumultuous months. Some had become educators committed to protecting vulnerable students. Others worked in policy or advocacy, shaped by witnessing institutional failure and collective resistance. Charlotte herself disappeared from our direct awareness, though occasional rumors surfaced about her struggles to find acceptance in academic communities. Her name had become synonymous with academic dishonesty, a cautionary tale whispered among competitive students. The empire she'd built through destruction had become her prison, but the lasting legacy wasn't Charlotte's fall. It was Gaia's rise, and the systemic changes her suffering had catalyzed. Every student who received accommodations without shame, every competitor who chose collaboration over sabotage, every administrator who prioritized ethics over rankings represented a small victory against the culture Charlotte had embodied. The morning I'd skipped breakfast to investigate had led to transformation far beyond individual justice. We'd proven that ordinary students, united by purpose and armed with evidence, could challenge entrenched power structures, not through dramatic confrontations or unrealistic interventions, but through careful documentation, strategic alliance building, and refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. In the end, Charlotte had created her own downfall by believing systemic protection made her untouchable. She'd failed to recognize that every person she destroyed had others who cared about them, and eventually, those connections would form a net strong enough to catch her when she fell. The girl with worn-out shoes and a voice recorder had lost everything because she dared to excel while needing accommodations. But in losing, she'd catalyzed changes that protected countless future students from similar fates. Her patient endurance, which Charlotte had mistaken for weakness, had outlasted all the cruelty directed at her. That Thursday morning, when Gaia walked back through Wexford's gates, she carried more than personal vindication. She represented every student who'd been told they didn't belong, who'd been sabotaged for being different, who'd nearly given up on their dreams because someone like Charlotte decided they were unworthy. And in classrooms across campus, students with voice recorders and special paper, with extra time and different needs, with brilliant minds that worked in non-standard ways, continued proving that excellence came in many forms. They learned without fear, competed without cruelty, and succeeded without stepping on others. That was the real victory, not just Charlotte's expulsion or Gaia's reinstatement, but the cultural shift that made Wexford a place where different could thrive alongside typical, where accommodation meant support rather than shame, where achievement included lifting others up. The rage I'd felt that night in the parking lot had transformed into something more useful, a commitment to documenting injustice and building coalitions for change. It wasn't as dramatic as my initial fury, but it was sustainable and effective. Real change came not from explosive moments, but from persistent pressure applied strategically over time. Gaia now works as a special education advocate, helping students navigate systems still struggling with inclusion. Her brother graduated high school with supports she'd fought to ensure he received. Charlotte's victims found various paths to healing, some through activism, others through quiet recovery, all carrying hard-won wisdom about power, vulnerability, and the importance of collective action. The evidence we'd gathered lived on in training materials and policy documents, helping other institutions recognize warning signs of academic sabotage. Our coalition's methods became a template for student organizing, proof that careful documentation and strategic action could overcome seemingly insurmountable power imbalances. Every September, new students arrived at Wexford, some with worn-out shoes and voice recorders, some with hidden struggles and visible differences. They entered a system still imperfect, but fundamentally changed, where their needs were met with support rather than suspicion, where their success was celebrated rather than sabotaged, and somewhere among them might be another Charlotte, drawn to power and willing to destroy others to claim it. But now, there were systems to catch her, people watching for patterns, and most importantly, a culture that no longer rewarded cruelty disguised as competition. The predators could no longer hunt freely in an environment that protected the vulnerable. That was Charlotte's most lasting legacy, not the careers she'd destroyed or the fear she'd instilled, but the immunity her actions had helped build against future versions of herself. In trying to eliminate competition, she'd created a generation of advocates. In targeting the vulnerable, she'd taught them to protect each other. The morning sun streamed through my office window as I finished documenting this story, years after those events at Wexford. Outside, I could hear students hurrying to classes, their voices carrying the casual confidence of those who'd never had to hide their learning differences or fear their classmates' ambitions. They didn't know about Charlotte or Gaia, about late nights gathering evidence or the terror of facing institutional power. They simply existed in a space made slightly safer by our struggles, taking for granted accommodations and protections that had been won through painful experience. And that was perhaps the greatest victory of all, that future students could focus on learning rather than survival, on collaboration rather than defense, on achieving their dreams rather than protecting them from predators. Charlotte had wanted to destroy one girl's future. Instead, she'd helped secure countless futures she'd never intended to protect. The files were closed, the evidence archived, the battles won. But the work continued in every classroom where difference was celebrated, every competition where integrity mattered more than victory, every moment when someone chose to document rather than ignore injustice. Charlotte was gone, but her victims' courage lived on, woven into the fabric of institutions, finally learning to protect all their students, not through dramatic interventions or unrealistic unrealistic solutions, but through the patient work of ordinary people who refused to accept that cruelty was the price of excellence. That was the real lesson from those dark days at Wexford. That sustainable change came not from individual heroics, but from collective action, sustained pressure, and the simple refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. Gaia's worn-out shoes had walked a path that led to systemic reform. Her voice recorder had captured not just lectures, but evidence of a culture that needed changing. And her patience, mistaken for weakness by those who sought to destroy her, had outlasted all their cruelty to help build something better. In the end, that's what mattered. Not the headlines or the drama, but the quiet work of making space for everyone to succeed. Charlotte had failed to understand that true excellence meant bringing others up, not tearing them down. Her victims, in their survival and resistance, had taught that lesson to an entire institution. And in schools across the region, students with different needs continued to prove that brilliance came in many forms. That accommodation wasn't advantage, but equity. That the kid in the back of the class might just be the one who changed everything, if given the chance Charlotte had tried to steal. The investigation concluded, the reforms implemented, the culture shifted. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter. Enough to ensure that the next Gaia would find allies instead of tormentors, support instead of sabotage, a chance to soar instead of boxes to pack in a dark parking lot. That was justice. Not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the vulnerable. Not just individual vindication, but systemic change. Not just one girl's story, but a transformation that rippled outward in waves of reform and recognition. Charlotte had lost more than her position or her reputation. She'd lost the world she'd tried to create, one where only the ruthless succeeded. In its place grew something better, something kinder, something that recognized strength in difference and power in collective action. And that world, imperfect but improving, was the one we'd fought to build. One investigation, one coalition, one act of courage at a time. Until the morning came when students could walk through Wexford's gates focused on learning rather than survival, on dreams rather than defense. That morning had arrived, brought about by rage transformed into strategy, pain transformed into purpose, and individual vulnerability transformed into collective strength. Charlotte was gone, her victims had healed, and the systems that had enabled her had been forever changed. The story ended not with dramatic confrontation, but with sustainable transformation. Not with perfect justice, but with real progress. Not with fairy tale conclusions, but with the messy, difficult, necessary work of making institutions safe for all who entered them. Gaia graduated, thrived, and dedicated herself to protecting others. Charlotte fell, disappeared, and became a cautionary tale. But most importantly, the culture shifted, the systems changed, and future students found a slightly better world than the one we'd inherited. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thanks for reading this story with me. It's been quite the ride from scholarship dreams to system-wide reforms. I hope you have a wonderful day filled with less drama than Wexford Academy. I will see you in the next one.